I was halfway inside my tent when something whispered my name from the darkness. Not shouted, not called, whispered, soft, careful, like whoever or whatever was out there didn't want anyone else to hear it. Jake. I froze with one hand on the zipper. The fire had burned down to glowing embers. The woods around me were black as coal. The Appalachian mountains stretched for miles in every direction, swallowing every bit of moonlight beneath their endless canopy. Then I heard it again. Jake. Closer this time, maybe 20 feet away. And that's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The voice wasn't coming from the woods. It was coming from the side of my tent, right outside the thin layer of fabric. I couldn't see a shadow, couldn't hear footsteps. Just that voice, waiting, patient, as if it knew I'd eventually answer. And the worst part, nobody on earth should have known where I was camping. To explain how I ended up in that situation, I have to take you back to 3 days earlier. Now I've spent most of my adult life camping. Nothing extreme. I'm not one of those guys who climbs mountains with frozen beards and talks about embracing the wilderness. Nah, I just like getting away from people. After 30 years working construction, sometimes the best vacation is sitting next to a campfire where nobody asks you for anything. Back in October of 2021, I decided to take a solo trip into a remote section of Appalachia near the border of Kentucky and West Virginia. Beautiful country, dense forests, steep ridges, tiny forgotten towns, and according to locals, more ghost stories than you could count. Of course, I didn't believe any of that, at least not then. The drive took nearly 6 hours. Cell service disappeared long before I reached the trailhead. By late afternoon, I parked my truck beside an old gravel road and started hiking. The forest felt different almost immediately. Not scary, just old. That's the only way I can describe it. The trees were massive. Some looked centuries old. Everything seemed untouched, like the mountain had been watching people come and go for generations. About 3 miles in, I found the perfect spot. A small clearing near a creek, flat ground, plenty of firewood, no signs of other campers. Perfect. I set up camp, cooked dinner, and spent the evening listening to the water flowing over rocks. Honestly, it was peaceful. The kind of peaceful that city people spend thousands of dollars trying to find. As darkness settled in, I sat by the fire and stared into the woods. That's when I noticed the first strange thing. The forest had gone completely silent. No crickets, no frogs, no owls, nothing. Now, if you've spent enough time outdoors, you know that's unusual. Nature is noisy, even at night. But suddenly, everything had stopped. I remember joking to myself, great, either a bear's nearby, or I'm about to become the opening scene of a horror movie. I laughed. The woods didn't. Something about that silence felt wrong. Still, I eventually convinced myself I was imagining things and climbed into my tent. Around midnight, I woke up to the sound of footsteps. Crunch, 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 slow and deliberate, circling the campsite. At first, I assumed it was a deer, maybe a raccoon, but these steps sounded heavier, much heavier. I grabbed my flashlight and listened. The footsteps stopped instantly. The silence returned. 5 minutes passed, nothing. Then, crunch, 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 this time on the opposite side of camp, like something was moving around me. Watching, I unzipped the tent and shined my flashlight into the darkness. Nothing. No eyes. No animals. No movement. Just trees. Thousands of trees. Eventually, I convinced myself exhaustion was playing tricks on me. I managed a few hours of sleep before sunrise. The next morning, everything seemed normal again. Birds chirping, water running, sunlight filtering through the leaves. I actually laughed about the whole thing. Funny how daylight can make you feel stupid for being scared. After breakfast, I spent the day exploring nearby trails. Around noon, I found something odd. An old campsite, abandoned years ago, maybe decades. Rusted cans, collapsed fire ring, pieces of weathered tarp tangled in tree roots. But one thing caught my attention. A wooden sign nailed to a tree. The lettering was faded, but still readable. It said, "Don't follow the voices." That's it. No explanation, no context, just those 4 words. Now, if you're anything like me, you're probably thinking the same thing. Some local teenager made it as a joke. That's exactly what I thought. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had wanted people to see it, to remember it. That evening, I returned to camp. The silence started again just before sunset. Every sound in the forest simply disappeared, like somebody had pressed mute on the entire mountain. And then I noticed something else. A light, far away among the trees. At first I thought it was another camper, but the light wasn't moving normally. It drifted, gliding between trunks, sometimes disappearing, sometimes reappearing farther away. I watched it for nearly 20 minutes. Eventually it vanished completely. I told myself it was probably another hiker. Still, something about it bothered me. I went to bed earlier than usual, and that's when everything changed. Sometime after midnight, I woke up. The campfire was dead. The air felt colder, much colder. Then I heard my name. Jake. The voice sounded distant, maybe 50 yards away. I sat upright. My heart instantly started pounding. Nobody should have been out there. Nobody. Then it came again. Jake. Closer. The voice sounded familiar somehow, like someone I knew. Maybe a relative. Maybe an old friend. I couldn't place it. The strange thing was how badly I wanted to follow it. That sounds crazy. I know. But the voice felt comforting, inviting, like someone needed help. I actually started reaching for my boots. Then I remembered the sign. Don't follow the voices. A chill ran through my body. I stayed inside the tent. The voice continued for nearly 10 minutes, each time getting closer, each time sounding more familiar. Then suddenly it stopped. Complete silence. I thought it was over. I was wrong. A few minutes later, I heard breathing, right outside the tent. Slow, heavy, human. The sound moved around the campsite, circling me. I held my flashlight so tightly my hand cramped. Every instinct screamed at me to look outside. But another instinct screamed louder. Don't. The breathing continued for almost an hour. Then it disappeared. I didn't sleep again that night. The moment sunrise arrived, I packed my gear. I didn't care about finishing the trip anymore. I wanted out. Fast. The hike back felt longer than before. The woods seemed darker. Every snap of a branch made me jump. About halfway to the trailhead, I noticed footprints beside the trail. Bare footprints. Human. The problem was, it had dropped below 40 degrees overnight. Nobody would be walking barefoot out there. The tracks followed the trail for several hundred yards, then suddenly left it, straight into the forest. I kept moving, trying not to think about it. When I finally reached my truck, relief washed over me. I threw my gear in the bed and climbed inside. Then I saw something under the windshield wiper. A folded piece of paper. My stomach dropped. I unfolded it. Written in shaky handwriting were 6 words. You should have followed me. I stood there staring at it, trying to make sense of what I was reading. Nobody had been at the trailhead when I arrived. Nobody knew where I'd camped. Nobody should have been able to leave that note. I looked around the empty parking area. Nothing. No vehicles. No people. Just mountains. I drove away immediately. I never went back. For months, I tried convincing myself there was a logical explanation. Maybe another camper. Maybe a prank. Maybe someone had been watching me. Honestly, that possibility scars me even more. But here's the part I can't explain. About a year later, I was showing photos from the trip to a friend. Most were normal pictures of trees, creeks, and campsites. Then I reached a photo taken near sunset on the second day, the one where I'd seen the strange light. At first, I didn't notice anything unusual. Then I zoomed in. Standing between two trees was a figure, tall, thin, almost blending into the darkness, watching the campsite, watching me. I don't know how long it had been there. I don't know what it was, and frankly, I don't want to know. These days, I still go camping, just not alone, and definitely not in that part of Appalachia, because every now and then, usually around midnight when the house is quiet, I'll wake up suddenly, and for a split second, I'll remember that voice, the way it sounded familiar, the way it wanted me to follow. And sometimes, I wonder what would have happened if I had stepped into those woods, if I had answered, if I had followed the voice calling my name into the darkness. Honestly, I think part of me already knows, and that's exactly why I'll never go back. I'm not going to tell you the exact moment I should have packed up and left, because the truth is, there were too many of those moments. Out there in the Appalachian backcountry, you don't get one clear warning. You get a series of small ones, like nature gently tapping you on the shoulder, then eventually grabbing you by the throat. And by the time you realize the difference, you're already too far in. My name is Chris Walker, and this happened during a solo camping trip in the Appalachian Mountains of eastern Tennessee. I've been camping most of my adult life, not the tourist kind. I mean real backcountry stuff. No RVs, no crowded parks. Just me, a pack, and enough supplies to last a few days. I always preferred it that way, because silence, when you're used to it, stops being empty. It starts feeling honest. That trip was supposed to be no different. 3 days, one ridge, one small valley campsite I'd picked off an old topo map. Nothing special, except it wasn't marked on newer maps anymore. I didn't think much of that at the time. Old trails disappear all the time. I started my hike late morning. The air was cool, heavy with that damp Appalachian smell, wet leaves, pine sap, and something earthy you can't quite name. By early afternoon, I was already deep enough that cell service was gone. That part didn't bother me. In fact, I liked it. No calls, no distractions, just the sound of boots hitting dirt. The trail was faint but still visible. Old, but used enough that I didn't feel completely alone. At least, at first. The first strange thing happened around 3 p.m. I came across a stack of rocks, not natural, not random. A cairn, trail markers, except these weren't spaced like normal markers. They were too close together, like someone had been pacing or circling. I remember laughing a little. Either somebody's really lost, I said out loud, or really bored. It felt stupid talking to myself, but out there, you do it anyway, just to hear something human. I kept moving. Another hour in, the forest got thicker. The trail became harder to follow, and then I noticed something that made me stop. The trees. Some of them had marks on them, fresh scratches. Too high for animals, too deep for casual hikers. and always facing the same direction, toward the trail, not away from it. That's when the first real discomfort set in. You know that feeling when your brain quietly says, "Hey, something's off here," but you ignore it because everything still looks normal. I checked my map, still on track, still heading toward the campsite, so I continued. Bad decision number 1. By late afternoon, I reached the clearing. It was smaller than I expected, maybe 20 feet across, a shallow slope leading down toward a creek. Perfect for camping. Too perfect, honestly, but I didn't question it. I set up my tent, filtered water, and made dinner. The sun dipped behind the ridge faster than I liked. That's one thing about Appalachia. Sunsets don't fade, they vanish. One moment it's light, the next it's dark enough that the forest feels like it's pressing in. I built a small fire anyway. Old habit. Fire makes everything feel less unknown. For a while, everything was fine. Just crackling wood, occasional wind, the creek moving in the distance like a low whisper. Then I heard something else, a voice, far off. Maybe it was faint enough that I almost convinced myself it was wind passing through branches. But it wasn't random sound. It had rhythm, like someone calling out words in intervals, not shouting, not talking, calling. I stood up slowly, listened. Nothing. Then again, same direction, downhill, toward the creek. I told myself it was another camper. That would have made sense, except I hadn't seen another trail marker in hours. Still, I called out, "Hello." Silence. Then the voice answered, not with words, with my name, or something close to it. Cries, drawn out, slow, like it was testing the shape of the word. I froze. That part matters, because fear doesn't always hit like panic. Sometimes it just tightens, like a hand slowly closing around your thoughts. I grabbed my flashlight and aimed it toward the trees. Nothing. No movement, no sound, just darkness between trunks. I convinced myself it was another hiker messing around. A joke, a bad one. I sat back down by the fire, tried to ignore it. That's when the second thing happened. The fire went quiet. Not out, just quieter. Like even the crackling had decided to stop. Then I heard footsteps. Not rushing, not heavy, just slow walking, circling the edge of the clearing. I turned the flashlight. Nothing. Turned again. Nothing. But the footsteps didn't stop. They kept going. Around me, in a full loop, like something was walking the perimeter of my campsite and making sure I knew it. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed by the fire until it turned to glowing ash. Every few minutes, I'd hear it. Step, pause, step, pause. Always just outside the light, never inside it. At some point, I started doing something stupid. I started talking back, not full sentences, just noise. Yeah, okay, I hear you. I don't know why. Maybe to prove I wasn't afraid. Maybe because I was. Around 2 a.m., the footsteps stopped. Completely. And that silence was worse, because now there was no pattern, no warning, just stillness. I sat there listening to the forest, waiting for something to continue. That's when I heard breathing. Close. Too close. Not behind me. Not far. Inside the clearing, like something was standing just beyond the firelight, watching me breathe. I didn't move, didn't speak. Then, from the darkness, came a sound I still can't explain properly. A cough. Human. Wet. Like someone trying to clear their throat after being silent too long. I swung the flashlight immediately, and for half a second, I saw it. A shape. Tall. Too still. Not walking away. Not approaching. Just standing where the light barely reached. Then it stepped back into darkness. slowly, like it knew exactly how much I could see. I didn't wait for morning after that. I packed everything in near total panic, tried to keep my hands steady, failed. The whole time, I kept feeling like I was being watched from multiple directions, not one, more, like the forest had split its attention. I left before sunrise, hiked fast, almost running, but here's the part I didn't expect. The trail wasn't the same. The path I came in on was gone, completely. In its place was fresh undergrowth, like it hadn't been used in years. I checked my map. Nothing matched. I was still moving forward, but forward didn't lead anywhere familiar anymore. And that's when I realized something I wish I hadn't. The clearing I camped in wasn't on any modern map either. I had stepped into a place the forest was still actively hiding. I made it out eventually. I always do. But I never told anyone the full story. Because the worst part isn't what I heard at night. It's what I found in my backpack 2 days later. A piece of bark, fresh, still damp, with deep scratches carved into it. 4 letters. Not my name. Just one word. Stay. And the strangest part, I never remember picking it up. If you've spent enough time in the Appalachian Mountains, you'll hear the same warning in 100 different ways. Don't follow lights in the woods. People laugh when they hear it. I used to laugh too. That was before I spent a summer in Blackthorn Hollow, and before I saw the light that shouldn't have existed. Blackthorn Hollow sits deep in the mountains of southern West Virginia. It's the kind of place GPS barely recognizes. One road winds through the valley, passing old farmhouses, rusted mailboxes, and stretches of forest so thick they seem to swallow the sunlight. I grew up there. When I was 19, I left for college and never looked back. Or at least I thought I didn't. 10 years later, after my grandfather passed away, I returned to settle his affairs. His house sat at the edge of town, beneath a ridge covered in dense pine forest. The place looked smaller than I remembered. The porch sagged. The paint peeled from the walls. But the mountains looked exactly the same. Ancient, silent, watching. The first few days were uneventful. I sorted through boxes, cleaned rooms, and prepared the property for sale. Most evenings, I sat on the porch after sunset. There wasn't much else to do. No traffic, no city noise, just crickets and distant wind moving through the trees. On the 4th night, I noticed a light. It appeared high on the ridge behind the house. A single yellow glow. At first, I assumed it belonged to a hunter. The mountains attracted plenty of them, but the light stayed perfectly still. Hours passed. It never moved. Around midnight, it vanished. The next morning, I mentioned it to my neighbor, Earl Jenkins. Earl was in his 70s and had lived in Blackthorn Hollow his entire life. The moment I described the light, his expression changed. He looked away toward the ridge. Then he said something strange. "Don't go looking for it." I laughed. Why would I? Just don't. That was all he said. The conversation ended there. That should have been enough. It wasn't. The light returned the following night. Same location, same brightness. Again it remained visible for hours. Again it disappeared at midnight. By the 3rd night, my curiosity outweighed my common sense. I grabbed a flashlight and decided to hike up the ridge. The trail began behind my grandfather's barn. I remembered walking it as a kid. Back then, it led to an abandoned fire tower. The climb was steeper than I remembered. Darkness settled beneath the trees. Branches scraped against each other overhead. The deeper I went, the quieter the forest became. No insects, no birds, nothing. The silence felt wrong. After 30 minutes, I reached a clearing. The light should have been nearby. but there was nothing. No camp, no lantern, no person, only trees. I checked my watch. 11:58 p.m. Then something happened. The light appeared. Not ahead of me, not above me, behind me. I turned. The glow floated between the trees, nearly 50 yards downhill. For a moment, I thought someone was carrying a lantern. Then I realized I couldn't see a person, only the light. It hung in the darkness by itself. I stared. The light remained motionless. My stomach tightened. Every instinct told me to leave. Instead, I took a step forward. The light moved, just a few feet, as if responding. I stopped. It stopped. The realization hit me immediately. Whatever I was seeing wanted me to follow it. I turned around and walked back toward the trail. The light followed. Not quickly, not aggressively. It simply drifted through the trees behind me, always maintaining the same distance. I never ran so fast in my life. When I reached the house, the light vanished. The next day, I found Earl sitting outside the general store. I told him everything. He listened quietly. When I finished, he nodded. "You're lucky." Lucky? It let you leave. I asked him what he meant. Earl stared toward the mountains. Then he told me a story. Decades earlier, before I was born, several people disappeared near the ridge. Hunters, hikers, locals who knew those woods their entire lives. Most were never found. Those who were found had wandered miles from where they vanished. Some were injured. Some couldn't explain what happened. All described seeing a light. According to local folklore, the light belonged to something older than the town itself. Something that lived in the mountains. Something that lured people away. I didn't believe the supernatural explanation, at least not then, but I couldn't explain what I'd seen. That night, I locked every door and stayed inside. The light appeared again. This time, it wasn't on the ridge. It stood at the edge of the backyard, just beyond the fence, watching. I closed the curtains. The next morning, I convinced myself I'd imagined it. Stress, lack of sleep, grief. There had to be a rational explanation. The following evening proved otherwise. Around 10 p.m., I heard knocking. 3 slow knocks against the front door. I checked the window. Nobody stood outside. Another 3 knocks, this time from the side of the house, then from the back. The sound moved around the property, always just out of sight. I grabbed a flashlight and looked through every window. Nothing. No people. No animals. Just darkness. Then I saw the light. It stood beside the barn, closer than ever. For several seconds it remained still. Then it began moving toward the house, not floating, walking. Something carried it. A shape emerged behind the glow. Tall, thin, far too tall. My flashlight beam struck it. The figure vanished instantly. The light disappeared with it. I didn't sleep that night, or the next. Every evening, the activity grew worse. Knocking, footsteps, the light. Always closer, always watching. On the 7th night, I woke around 2 a.m. Someone was standing on the porch. I heard the floorboards creaking. Slow footsteps, back and forth, back and forth. I looked through the window. The porch was empty, but the footsteps continued. The sound came from directly outside the glass. I kept the curtains closed until sunrise. By then, I had reached my limit. I packed my belongings and prepared to leave. Before departing, I visited Earl one final time. When I told him I was leaving, he seemed relieved. Then he gave me one final warning. Don't look back at the ridge. I almost laughed, but something in his expression stopped me. A few hours later, I loaded my truck and drove away. The road wound through the valley. Eventually, it reached a bend where the ridge became visible one last time. I remembered Earl's warning. I intended to follow it. Instead, curiosity won. I glanced into the rearview mirror. At first, I saw nothing unusual. Then I noticed dozens of lights, not one, dozens, scattered among the trees, some near the ground, others higher up the slope, all perfectly still, watching the road, watching me leave. A cold wave passed through my body. I accelerated. The lights remained visible for several miles, only disappearing when the mountains finally vanished behind me. That was 12 years ago. I've never returned to Blackthorn Hollow. The property was sold. Earl passed away a few years later. Most people would say the story ends there. Unfortunately, it doesn't. 3 months ago, I received an email from the family who bought my grandfather's house. The message contained only one photograph. It showed the ridge behind the property at night. Dozens of yellow lights glowed among the trees. Beneath the photo was a single sentence. "Have you ever seen these before?" I deleted the email. I never replied, because some questions are safer unanswered, and some lights in the Appalachian Mountains are better left alone. The forest that called my name. If you've ever driven through the Appalachian Mountains at night, you know something feels different out there. Maybe it's the endless darkness. Maybe it's the fog that seems to move with a mind of its own. Or maybe it's the feeling that something is watching from between the trees. Most people laugh when they hear stories about the Appalachian Mountains, until they spend a night there. Then they stop laughing. What you're about to hear happened to a man named Eric Collins in the fall of 2019. At least, that's the name he used when he shared his story. And after hearing what happened to him, you might understand why. Because some places don't just hold secrets. Some places hunt. Eric had never believed in ghost stories. He was 42 years old, worked as a utility inspector, and spent most of his life driving through remote areas. His job often took him to isolated locations where cell service disappeared, and the nearest town might be 30 miles away. So when he received an assignment near a small Appalachian community in eastern Kentucky, he treated it like any other work trip. The town was barely visible on most maps. A handful of houses, one gas station, a church, and miles of mountains surrounding everything like walls. The locals were friendly enough, but Eric noticed something strange almost immediately. Nobody seemed comfortable talking about the woods. At first, he assumed it was just local superstition. Then, things got weirder. While checking equipment near the edge of a forest, he met an elderly man sitting on the porch of a rundown cabin. The old man watched him for several minutes before speaking. "You planning on being out there after dark?" Eric laughed. "Depends how long the inspection takes." The old man didn't smile. "Don't answer if something calls your name." Eric chuckled. "Pretty sure I'll know if someone calls me." The old man stared toward the trees. "No, you won't." Then he stood up and walked inside. Conversation over. Kind of rude, right? But later that evening, Eric found himself thinking about it. The warning, the expression on the old man's face, the way he sounded genuinely afraid. Still, he dismissed it. People everywhere had local legends. Nothing unusual about that. The next morning, he headed deeper into the mountains. Several inspection points were located along old service roads winding through dense forest. The further he drove, the quieter everything became. No birds, no insects, nothing, just silence. The kind of silence that makes you notice your own breathing. Around noon, Eric stopped his truck and stepped out. The woods stretched endlessly in every direction. towering trees blocked most of the sunlight. That's when he heard it. A whistle. Soft, distant, 3 notes, then silence. He turned around. Nobody. The sound seemed to come from somewhere deep within the forest. He waited. Nothing happened. Eventually, he returned to work. But over the next hour, he heard the whistle again. Always distant. Always 3 notes. Never close enough to locate. And somehow, it seemed to be following him. Now maybe you're thinking it was a bird or another worker. That's exactly what Eric thought. At first. By late afternoon, dark clouds rolled over the mountains. Rain started falling. Visibility dropped fast. Eric backed up and began driving back toward town. The road twisted through steep hillsides and dense woods. Rain hammered the windshield. Then his truck stalled. Just died. Right in the middle of nowhere. No signal. No houses. No traffic. Perfect. Because apparently, horror stories don't happen in parking lots. They happen when you're 40 miles from civilization. Eric tried restarting the engine. Nothing. Again. Nothing. The rain intensified. As daylight faded, the surrounding forest became a wall of black shadows. Then he heard it. Eric. A voice. Outside. Clear as day. His hands froze. The voice sounded familiar. Almost like his brother. But that wasn't possible. His brother lived hundreds of miles away. Eric. This time it came from the woods. Just beyond the road. The old man's warning slammed into his memory. Don't answer if something calls your name. A chill crawled up his spine. He stayed silent. The voice called again. Closer. Eric. Then something happened that still terrifies him years later. The voice changed. It became his mother's voice. Exactly. Every detail, every tone, every inflection. Eric's sweetheart. His heart started pounding. Because his mother had died 8 years earlier. The forest fell silent. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then movement appeared among the trees. A figure, standing motionless, watching, too far away to identify, too still to be normal. Eric locked the truck doors. The figure remained there, not moving, not approaching, just watching. Minutes passed, then lightning illuminated the mountains. For a split second, he saw the figure clearly, and immediately wished he hadn't. Its proportions were wrong. The arms looked too long, the shoulders bent at unnatural angles, and the face, there wasn't one, just darkness. When the lightning faded, the figure was gone, completely gone. Eric spent the next 2 hours trapped inside his truck. Rain continued pouring. Darkness swallowed everything beyond the headlights. Then the whistling returned. 3 notes. Much closer now. From somewhere behind the vehicle. The whistle moved slowly around the truck. One side, then the other. Like something circling him. Studying him. Waiting. Every instinct screamed at him not to look outside. So, naturally, he looked outside. Nothing. No movement, no figure. Just rain. But when he checked the passenger side mirror, he noticed something odd. A muddy handprint, fresh, pressed against the glass. From the outside, Eric nearly jumped out of his skin. Because he hadn't heard anyone approach. And whoever left it had done so silently. Very silently. The whistling stopped. For a moment, everything became eerily calm. Then a new sound emerged. Footsteps. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Slowly approaching through the darkness. Each step deliberate. Measured. Closer, closer, closer. Then they stopped directly beside the truck. Eric couldn't see anything. But something was standing there. He knew it. The feeling was overwhelming. The same feeling you get when someone is staring directly at you. Except this felt worse. Predatory. The driver's side window fogged slightly, and through the condensation, words appeared, as if traced by a finger. "Look at me." Eric later said that was the moment he genuinely believed he was going to die. Then, without warning, the truck engine started, by itself. No key, no ignition, just started. The headlights flashed, and for a split second, something stood directly in front of the vehicle. Tall, thin, wrong. Then it vanished. Eric slammed the truck into gear and sped down the mountain road. Branches scraped against the sides. Rain blurred his vision. But he didn't care. He just wanted distance. Lots of distance. After nearly 20 minutes of driving, he finally reached town. Safe, or so he thought. He checked into a motel, locked the door, closed the curtains, and convinced himself the nightmare was over. At around 3 in the morning, he woke to a soft whistle outside his room. 3 notes, the same whistle. His blood ran cold. Slowly, he approached the window. The parking lot was empty, except for one figure standing beneath a streetlight. Watching his room, the figure remained perfectly still. Eric called the front desk. The clerk answered immediately. Before Eric could explain, the clerk interrupted him. "Don't look at it." Silence. "What?" "Close the curtain." The clerk sounded terrified. "Now." Eric obeyed. The figure remained outside until sunrise. When morning finally arrived, it was gone. No footprints, no evidence, nothing. Eric checked out immediately. Before leaving town, he stopped at the gas station. The cashier listened quietly as Eric described everything. When he finished, the woman simply nodded. Then she said something he has never forgotten. "It followed you because you heard it." Eric asked what it was. The woman shrugged. "No one knows." Then she leaned closer. "But when it learns your voice." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Eric left the mountains that day and never returned. Months passed, then years. Nothing unusual happened. Life went back to normal. Eventually, he convinced himself it was over. Until one night, 3 years later, he was sitting alone in his living room, watching television, hundreds of miles away from Appalachia, far from the mountains, far from the forest. Then he heard it, outside his house. 3 soft notes, the whistle, the exact same whistle. Eric rushed to the window. Nobody was there. No movement, no shadows, nothing. But on the glass, a muddy handprint slowly slid downward from the top corner, as though something had been hanging upside down above the window, watching him, waiting. And according to Eric, the whistle still returns. Not every night, not every month, just often enough to remind him. Whatever called his name in those mountains never really left. Maybe that's why Appalachian legends endure. Not because people believe them, but because people experience them. And sometimes, the mountains don't keep what belongs to them. Sometimes, they let it follow you home. If this story kept you looking over your shoulder tonight, make sure you watch the next nightmare on this channel. There's another Appalachian encounter waiting for you there. And trust me, it gets even darker.